Okay, let's go. Welcome everybody to our November 2021 Women IT Pros APAC call, and we try and dedicate the month of Microsoft Ignite to give you a bit of an update on what we have seen and heard that you might have missed or that you might be interested in, because we know that it's a virtual conference over a couple of days, and it's kind of just hard to keep up with all the information flow while you're juggling all the other things you do in your world. We understand. So I'm Sonia Cuff, a senior cloud advocate for Microsoft, and with me is Jess Johnson. Say hi, Jess.
Hi, Jess. So I'm Jess Johnson, customer engineer with Microsoft in identity and security. So any of the stuff that's identity and security related is the stuff that I get to talk about. And I'll leave everything else for Sonia, because then I'm going to learn something.
Look, we certainly make a good team, and it was kind of funny when we were putting these slides together. I'm like, well, I'm starting like with the Azure infrastructure end, and then Jess is like, I've got all this other stuff to add. I'm like, excellent, I haven't got to that stuff yet, because yeah, there is a bit. So let's get into it. Microsoft Ignite, all of the content at the moment is still up at the short link for Microsoft Ignite, which is aka.ms/MS Ignite. Now, that page will change, and you may have noticed that since COVID times and our events going online, we have started to do Microsoft event twice a year now instead of just once. And so this page will get updated to start promoting the new Ignite, the one that is planned for 2022. I can't believe I'm actually saying that number out loud. So eventually this short link will change to be the promo for the new event. However, all of the session content is still up there right now, and the session content will continue to live on and have a home. I'm just going to pause there and talk about an announcement that wasn't from Ignite that you may have seen floating around, that Microsoft for a long time has had a place called Channel 9, and channel9.microsoft.com has been the place where we have archived a lot of our video content, and a lot of things that we do live then go to Channel 9, and that's where we live. Channel 9 is being decommissioned as a space in essence, because we also have now Microsoft Learn, and we've also got space for video content inside docs.microsoft.com. So there will be a new space coming for video content, and a lot of the archive stuff, maybe not all of it, because like we're seriously like going back to 2003 and earlier. So some of that older stuff may not transfer across, but definitely the recordings for these sessions longer term, once they sort of age out of being the current Ignite show, will be preserved and will live in that new content space, which I should really find a link for, but I'm not 100% sure if it's live yet, because that whole thing is still in progress. So there you go. You will be able to find these sessions after for a longer period of time, which is good to know. Yeah. Yes. However, at that page right now, you can go and have a look at the session scheduler. So the screenshot on your screen at the moment shows the little attendee sign in at the top right-hand corner. So this is the public view of the website. This is not someone who registered for the event. So you can see that the entire contents of the session catalog and all the sessions right now without having to register or log in, which is really cool. And what I've done is I clicked on the little refine results filter button underneath the search bar, and it's brought up a list of things that I can refine it down to on the left hand side. So I can just look at the breakouts, or I can just look at the particular sort of topics and solution areas that I'm interested in. Obviously the search bar is going to work, but this is kind of a good way to refine out. Not all of the sessions were recorded, and I know it's going to sound a little bit weird, but we have things like product roundtables, and we have connection zone sessions, which are more meet and greet and discuss things in small groups. And so some of those sessions aren't recorded. The breakouts definitely are, and the keynotes and all the rest of it. So that's a good thing to know. So go there, have a look in the session scheduler, type in your topics and see what you're interested in and find the related sessions. The other cool thing about the Ignite content as it is on that page at the moment is your ability to download the resources. So I love the fact that with Ignite, I can go through that session catalog and I can look at the products I'm interested in. And sometimes if the presenter has made them available, I can steal their slide decks, because the slide deck has all the branding and the names and the pretty diagrams, and it makes my work so much easier when I'm putting together a new slide deck. Do you do that too, Jess?
Yeah, take a look, because I've got to admit, and we'll get into that, particularly when new branding things happen, being able to pilfer all of that kind of stuff makes life way easier.
Absolutely. So this is a session that is already aired. You can see there is a link to download the video, which you'll download it as an MP4. For this session, you can download the slides. And the download resources button actually gives you a PowerShell script that you can run. And with the PowerShell script, you can put in the session codes of the sessions that you're interested in downloading all the resources for in bulk. Now, if you run it without specifying the session codes, it will try and download the entire resources for all the sessions of all Ignite. If you have the bandwidth and the disk space, go for it. Knock yourself out. Like that.
Good for you. We are very jealous.
But if you put together a few sort of sessions that you're interested in, you want to download all the resources all at once, it will download a little PowerShell script for you to run and add some modifiers. There's a little text file that tells you the instructions of what variables to add in to just get the content that you're interested in. So very handy tips now that content has gone live. My other favorite resource for Microsoft Ignite that you may or may not know about is the Book of News. Now, Microsoft puts out a book of news with every Ignite event and every Microsoft build. And the Book of News is sent publicly. It's published online. It's sent to all our PR contacts and the media agencies. So if you're looking for the just tell me what's new, like I just want to get a list of all the announcements, the Book of News is the place to go. I've put the link down there at the moment. It's at news.microsoft.com/ignite-november-2021-book-of-news. A lot of dashes. That's the URL. Look, generally, I completely forget about the URL. I just go to my favorite search engine. I type in Microsoft Ignite November 2021 Book of News, and I managed to find it. I think there is an AKA short link, but I can never remember what it is. So the Book of News is really good for bringing up the table of contents, having a bit of a scroll through, bite-sized pieces like we will go through today about some of the announcements and links to learn more, or read the product group blog announcement, that kind of thing. Jess, have you heard of the Book of News before?
I had, but it was only like very recently. Like I didn't realize that it was available previously. I knew the Book of News existed like for this one. This is the first one that I knew it existed. If I'd known it existed before, that would have made life way easier.
I know, right?
Why don't we advertise it more?
Look, maybe because we want people just to come to the conference and not just cheat and watch all the read all the announcements. I guess, I don't know. Look, it certainly makes life easier. So yeah, the Book of News is a thing. We've actually been doing it for a long time, even when the events were in person. But yeah, go find that and scroll through your favorite topics and find all the latest announcements. Next, Jess and I have curated a list of some of our favourite sessions. Now, the session catalogue has hundreds of them, and it can be hard to find what was useful and what wasn't. But I'm going to start off with a series of sessions called the Blueprint Files. Now, the Blueprint Files was developed by my direct manager, Rick Claus, and he managed to get some product group contacts to get into the Redmond studios and do some really nifty things with some sort of technical deep dive sessions. And the link I've put on the slide will take you to a blog post that outlines the different Blueprint Files sessions. But I'm going to start with highlighting From Stronger to Stronger, phishing resistant authentication methods. This is a really great example of a technical deep dive session where two of our product group contacts actually stand in front of a light board and they diagram out how authentication works in the background and what we mean by phishing resistant authentication methods. So if you really like that sort of deep dive technical detail, you want someone to draw it out for you, it's definitely, there's no PowerPoint slides involved at all in that particular session. It's just a really, really great one to watch. And I also had the pleasure of talking to Inbar and Libby from the Identity Product Group about that session and some of the other things about phishing resistant authentication methods. So ways that you can log in that aren't as susceptible to hackers to get access to by pretending to be, a valid website when you're really trying to steal your password. So the Ask the Expert session was also a bit of a good watch. We had some great questions come in from the community and we answered those in the recording as well. So go check that one out. PowerShell Unplugged with Geoffrey Snover. If you've done anything with PowerShell, you may or may not know that Geoffrey is literally the father of PowerShell. He invented this command language, and he's one of the nicest guys on the planet. I've had the privilege of meeting him in person a number of times, and Powershell Unplugged is just another great session as part of our blueprint files as well, and also managing Windows updates in the cloud. So I don't know, I think this one kind of flew under the radar, but it's one of those sessions where you go, hang on a minute,
I need to do this.
We're talking about Windows updates. Like, who's doing sessions at Microsoft's latest conferences really about Windows updates? Like, seriously?
Yeah.
And
it's so important.
Yeah. And we're going, well, there's a whole bunch of IT pros in the world who, guess what? They do a heck of a lot of managing Windows updates, don't they, Jess? Just a little bit. So again, whiteboard session, that takes you through the processes. That's a really good one. Strengthen resilience with identity innovation in Azure AD. So that's kind of our keynote session by Joy Chick, who runs our identity division, who tells you about all the latest and greatest capabilities in Azure AD. And then a couple of security ones. So we've got secure, develop and innovate in hybrid and multi-cloud with Microsoft Azure, which is one of the sessions that wins the title for the most amount of buzzwords in a thing. But it's also a really good session that also talks about the capabilities that we've got and how they flow through to environments that aren't inside our Azure cloud, whether they're on premises in your own data center, in somebody else's data center, or in somebody else's cloud. Moving right along. Microsoft Ignite Interfocus infrastructure. Again, I know that these sessions are very Azure heavy. It tends to be more of the announcements that we're seeing from Microsoft and more in our cloud products. And this is a great one from Erin Chappell. So Erin Chappell is responsible for infrastructure inside Azure, and she's got a really great session, which is again like another keynote. Then we've got manage risk and compliance with end-to-end security solutions. Now, the title on this one's a little bit deceptive. It's actually an M365 session. So if you're doing M365 and you're looking at security through that lens, that's the one for you. I also liked Cloud Security, a guide for developing a comprehensive multi-cloud security strategy. Again, talking about things like Azure Arc and how that can enable visibility of other resources into Azure that can then be managed by our security products. And then skilling for security, forging the workforce of the future. Now, I have to admit, I actually haven't watched that last session, but the title grabbed me. It's not very often in these conferences that we see sessions that talk about things like skilling and help position people for the roles of their future. And you might have a bit to say about this, Jess, because I tend to find that especially people that are newer to tech and newer in particular to IT and infrastructure, this is often a question that comes up of what part of tech should I go into, especially if I don't want to do software development and code, and is security a good thing? Like, how do I get started?
And I haven't watched this one yet, but it is actually in my backpack. I haven't had a chance to sit down and watch it, flat strap, but I'm keen to know what they mean by forging that workforce for the future. And I'm hoping that the idea of skilling for security is not just we need more security professionals. It's we need all of our IT folk to be security minded so that we can have that as part of our base skill set. And that's what I'm really hoping that it talks to.
Yeah, and not only that, but our workforce too, right? I mean, I'm just trying to remember when I first started working in a corporate organization, and I didn't start in the IT department, there weren't as many areas of risk, right? Like, we were in a bank, we used dumb terminals that were connected to the mainframe, we didn't even have email. So there were no viruses getting in, there were no attachments, that could have malware. There were no phishing links being sent to us in an email. Like, the old adage of security was so much easier when I started in tech because there wasn't any of that risk. But the process now that organizations should be going through to educate their own workforce about security risks from an IT perspective, just in the general work that they do. We could have a whole conversation about how to do that effectively so that it doesn't become repetitive and it doesn't become noise and that security doesn't feel like it's getting in the way of people doing their jobs.
And I think and it's something that I talk about all the time as part of the work that I do, is security is fantastic, but once it gets in the road of usability, that's when people will find ways to go around it. So security professionals and IT professionals, we kind of need to make sure that we are balancing and doing that balancing act of making sure our users are happy. And if we can get them interested and paying attention to the security aspects of what they are doing, that will be much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think? Are there any sessions in that list that caught your eye? Do you have any favorites that I've missed off that list? Jump in the chat, let us know. Drop a link in if you have one. If you don't, that's okay. We can probably dig it out. But yeah, what sessions Ignite did you see caught your eye, or are any of those ones interesting that you think you might go and check out? Let us know. All right. Moving right along, let's get into the announcements. This is not Microsoft Ignite in 60 minutes. We're not going to cover the whole thing. I'm very sorry. But I kind of cherry-picked some and tried to go a little bit broader in scope. So starting with Azure SQL Managed Instance. So Azure SQL Managed Instance isn't a new thing. It's basically a product where you can run SQL in the cloud and Microsoft will manage the underlying infrastructure for you. So this is a platform as a service offering. You don't need to run a virtual machine with Windows Server on it and manage that underlying Windows Server instance, or how well SQL is running. But what is new that I thought was an interesting little announcement is this new feature called Link, where you can connect other SQL servers, no matter where they're hosted, into your Azure SQL managed instance. Now, think of the capabilities that opens up when you do that. So we're talking about disaster recovery, maybe from on-prem to the cloud, bi-directional migration, and workloads being offboarded to read-only on Azure. So if you've got workloads that have been running in your environment that you might need to archive off, but you still need to access the data, like the ability to take those and put them into Azure as read-only instances. So I thought that was pretty cool. I haven't done a lot with SQL in my past, but I know that there are a lot of data people and a lot of applications that rely on it. Have you come across any of this, Jess?
No, so I haven't played around too much with any of the functionality inside of that, which is why I find it really, really cool when you start talking about it, because I'm like, yay, I get to learn about all the cool stuff. So no, it's stuff that I haven't even touched or seen. So it's very exciting to see these being announced at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that our IT pros tend to do, platform as a service offerings are a lot more hands-off for us. There's not a heck of a lot of bells and whistles to tweak once those managed instances are established, but just to know that this capability exists, and then what other things that it opens up for your business to be able to do is part of IT pro life, is keeping up to date with some of that stuff. Excellent. Azure Logic Apps. Now, again, Logic Apps are interesting because you can either play with them to do some seriously cool automation, or they are used for being able to automate some of the other features inside Azure. So, maybe it's an Azure Monitor alert, maybe it's something to do with security that we then want to feed into a Logic app to put in a series of steps of what happens next. The interesting announcement was that customers can now run Logic apps fully disconnected. So using Azure Arc and leveraging your existing SQL storage that you might have on-prem instead of in the cloud. And this is in preview at the moment, but Logic apps have always been one of those things that you've needed the internet to run, and they've always run up in Azure. So the ability to run Logic apps on-prem and even in fully disconnected scenarios, I thought that was a really interesting capability. And we also talk about managed identity support for various built-in operations and connectors. So Logic Apps is one of those things where it's the engine that's going to say, if this happens over here, do something else in this other system. Well, if this other system isn't controlled by the same identity control plane, if it's not a Microsoft product or service, it may need an identity to log in to run as, to be able to do that thing, create the thing in Salesforce or do whatever it needs in that other system. So some of the operations and connectors inside Logic Apps now support the idea of a managed identity. So instead of you going and having to create an identity in that system, and then, having to make sure that that's secure and who knows the password and that kind of thing, the system will actually use these managed identities where it will go and create the identity as part of the Logic Apps process, and it will only be used for that particular process itself. So managed identities are one of those things, if you haven't done much with them, they are becoming a lot more common across the things that we do in Azure. Even for things like managing virtual machines, we can use system assigned managed identities, but it was interesting to see them coming into Logic Apps as well.
And from a security perspective, we push managed identities quite heavily, moving away from things like those standard service accounts that you see a lot of people using. So stop using service accounts and using these managed identities. So being able to utilize managed identities and start looking at being able to use Logic Apps and that automation on-prem, completely disconnected, at least for me, from a security perspective, is incredibly awesome, because it means that we've got that tie back to be able to do some of that automation disconnected on-prem, which is amazing.
So cool, hey? Okay, Azure Arc. So Azure Arc had a couple of updates. The one that I want to pick out in particular is a bit of enhanced integration with Vm Vsphere. So I quite often talk about Azure Arc in this scenario of onboarding an on-prem Windows Server virtual machine into the cloud, and so I can now manage it from Azure, and it becomes part of my cloud environment for all the things I'm doing with my servers that are in the cloud as well. But this actually extends more into VMware's vSphere. So now you can go and do operations that you would normally use vSphere for, but execute them from the cloud across multiple vSphere deployments, no matter where that you've got, and then hooking them into the different Azure services. So I thought this was really interesting, because it's taking that next step of, hey, it's not just Hyper-V VMs. Now you can keep your VMware vSphere virtual machines on-prem, but using Azure Arc, you can also make them part of your total environment picture that you're getting access to in Azure and controlled by all those Azure services. So it really is hybrid for the win. Hey, Jess.
And that's the thing. So talking about, everyone's so focused on the cloud is the way to go. And that's like, we are very big on try and move what you can to the cloud, but hybrid's going to be here for at least, from in my perspective, as far as the eye can see. People aren't willing to get off of all of that on-prem infrastructure that they've sunk so much cost into. So the fact that we've got this ability now inside Azure to manage it in such a nice way, in that, and I hate using the phrase, that single pane of glass, where you have that one place to see all of the things, to be able to connect back, I think it makes life much easier for IT pros. And it also means that there's more of a push to start having that connectivity and then slowly start moving things up into the cloud, rather than having two completely disparate systems.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been the main thing, you know, as we've seen workloads evolve and we've seen people put systems in clouds and data centers and wherever else they've got them outside of just the perimeter of their on-premises network. How you manage those systems became really fragmented, and you're right, to be able to pull it all together. And I think that's really where we're seeing a lot of investment at the moment, is Azure not only as a hosting place, but as a management and control plane. Yeah.
And I think that is what is missing, to be able to have that ability to manage everything, your identities, your securities, your governance, and all of your operational controls from one place, no matter where it sits. And I think that's where Azure is really pivoting itself towards at the moment, and building the capabilities to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next on my list, Windows Server on Azure. Look at that. We were just kind of talking about that. But there have been some new announcements, especially for Windows Server 2022. But we've now got Azure Auto Manage for Windows Server. So that includes a couple of capabilities like hot patching, the ability to deploy Windows updates to your servers without needing to reboot it. So that's in preview at the moment. We've got SMB over quick. Now, my dear friend Nepile will be able to wax lyrically about the in-depth technically cool things about SMB over quick. But in a nutshell, what we're talking about here is SMB is our file sharing protocol, right? It's the protocol that gets used on your on-prem server when you go and share some folders or some files and your people connect to it as a network drive. What we're looking at with SMB over quick is the ability to share files from Azure without needing to establish a dedicated VPN into Azure networking, because behind the scenes what it does is the server's creating a TLS 1.3 encrypted tunnel over the internet using UDP port 443 instead of TCP/IP port 445. Now, that's a bunch of numbers, but basically what it means is that your file sharing traffic is now going over this encrypted VPN without you needing to stress about setting up a VPN gateway and all those other things. And it's not going across normal TCP/IP transport. It's going over your secure UDP port 443. So the intricacies of this are really cool. The end user experience is going to be pretty seamless, but it's pretty interesting to see this sort of next level advance in security for file sharing.
It is, and I've got to admit, I don't understand any of it.
I need to get I think Ned may have done some stuff, but I think I might need to do like an intro to that's kind of at a lower level, especially for IT pros who are just used to establishing file shares on an on-prem network, right? And then usually you would VPN into that network, and then you'd have access to your file shares. The other thing I've got there is Extended Network for Azure. And Extended Network for Azure allows you to stretch your on-premises subnet into Azure so that you can let your on-prem VMs keep their original IP address when you're migrating them to Azure. So some environments, I'm not asking you to put up your hand if you've got one of these, some environments have kind of established themselves and evolved over time to the point where there may be a few host files on a few computers, and there may be applications and there may be routing paths that all have hard-coded IP addresses for what the Windows server is. And if you were to move that Windows server, I know, right? Not our environment, surely. If you were to move that Windows server and give it a different IP address, there is a significant amount of stuff that would no longer work. So this extended network for Azure is about giving you the capability to stretch that network into Azure and to kind of keep that server having its IP address that it was using before. So there's good technical details in the link on there if you want to learn a little bit more about what it is and how to set it up. Azure Virtual Machine Scale Set Flexible Orchestration. That's a little bit of a mouthful. In essence, what it's saying is with Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets, we have the ability to take a set of virtual machines and scale them when we need, because we've got more demand on the systems and we don't want to have to do that manually. So flexible orchestration means that it's easier for us to get control of individual VMs inside that scale set. We can change VM sizes inside that scale set without having to redeploy the entire scale set. We can mix two different VM types of our spot VMs and our pay-as-you-go VMs. You couldn't do that in the same scale set before. We can spread our instances across multiple fault domains or specify one fault domain, but the next part's really cool. We can automatically increase or decrease the VMs in the scale set based on metrics, based on schedule time, or based on AI predictions. So again, I love this automation, and I love seeing AI come into the IT pro world where we're not talking about, analyzing images to do object recognition for an application here. We're talking about let's use artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyze demand in our systems, and when it detects that demand is increasing, or it's like predicting the weather, all of the things there are right to predict that we're going to have a big surge in demand, then go ahead and increase the scale sets and decrease the scale sets when we don't need them. Is that my audio going weird again, Jess?
It is. And I thought it was my headset because I know that my headset is running out of charge. I thought it was just me, but Tanya has also, and Lisa have both said that they're hearing the same thing. So you're clear, like we can hear you, but you're speaking in a very robot voice. It's very bizarre.
2 seconds, I'm going to change my microphone. Okay, does that make a difference?
It does. We can hear you perfectly.
All right. Let's see.
I like Lisa. Lisa's like,
now
I kind of like
you,
it.
Jess. Hang on a sec. I think it's changed my.
I've got to agree, Lisa. I actually did like it. It was kind of like tech. It was very cool. Can you hear us now?
Yep, I think it's my headset.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
That's okay. We're good. We have redundancy. This is, IT pros for the win. We have an alternate set of speakers and microphones. Just fluff up my hair because I've taken my headset off. Cool. See, this is how we roll as IT pros, right?
There's a problem, we fix it, we keep going.
Let's kick in some redundancy. Excellent. Okay, moving right along. Azure Monitor. So, again, monitor all the things, but the cool part about it is some enhanced capabilities for monitoring networks. And I love this because, when I worked in IT for a big bank, I used to walk in, we had a dedicated team of comms people, and the comms people looked after the WANs, they looked after, everything from the cabling on an individual floor in head office. And if we had anything I thought was remotely connected to the network, I'd tap them on the shoulder and I'd say, follow me and bring your fluke. And they come along and they put the fluke on the network. And we'd had this argument about whether it was the network or not, as you do. But
it's always the network. If anyone's wondering, it is always the network.
That's right. It's never DNS. It's always the network. So Azure Monitor has announced enhanced networking capabilities for troubleshooting Azure Firewall and VPN gateways. Woohoo! With some preview monitoring workbooks and stuff like that as well. So you may have played with this already. It was in preview. The announced ignitement was more that it's gone to being generally available at a public preview. But there is a link there to find out what was new in Azure Monitor. Azure Virtual Network Manager. This, I haven't had a chance to play with this, but this looks really cool as well. So Azure Virtual Network Manager is now in preview and it's free until the 1st of February next year, which you could kind of put 2 and 2 together and go, oh, maybe that's the date it's going to go generally available, but I'm not going to make that prediction. But what it means is that you can manage virtual networks across more than one subscription, and you can use the configuration feature to help you create complex virtual networks like mesh or hub and spoke in just a few clicks. So instead of having to figure out what your network looks like and then going to have to build the individual pieces in Azure, you can use Azure Virtual Network Manager to help you provision the whole thing, and it will go and provision the underlying network resources that you need, which I thought was really cool. And then security, Jess, security features, can help customers create administrator rules to enforce organizational level security policies across these networks that they're setting up.
I absolutely love this. So I had heard of this one. I also haven't played with it. And for a lot of the customers that I have, they have this issue where trying to manage all of their virtual networks across their subscriptions is really complicated and difficult. If you've got Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we'll get into that in a bit, it makes it a little bit easier, but being able to do this and use the Virtual Network Manager and have it all in one place, it's phenomenal. I'm very looking forward to having a poke with it, even though I am not a network administrator in any way, shape or form.
Yes. Cool. Your turn, Jess. You're welcome to take control if you want to drive the slides.
Yes, actually, I will. So I will take control, see whether that will work. That will let me. Awesome. So first up off the bat, when it comes to security, is the fact that, as we know, Microsoft loves to change the names of things just to sort of play around with us. That is the polite version. When this came about, I was so bitter and twisted because all of my branding, all of my slide decks, all of my presentations, everything had to be changed because everything had changed names. So what used to be called Azure Security Center or Azure Defender is now Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Same has gone for Azure Defender for IoT, moved across to this Microsoft Defender for IoT. Azure Sentinel has become Microsoft Sentinel. You may be seeing a pattern here. So everything is being rolled into this Defender package. So Microsoft Defender is going to be the be all and end all when it comes to security inside of your Azure and Microsoft 365 environment. And that's the whole idea of this. I think the hardest one for me is going to get used to not calling it MCAS or Cloud App Security and changing to Defender for Cloud Apps. Like I'm sorry, it will always be MCAS to me. So that one's probably going to be the trickiest one.
Yeah, and I've got a blog post to write tonight on this, and while it's fairly easy to turn around and say, look, here's the table of the old names and the new names, my blog post is going to go a little bit more into explaining the difference between these products and kind of how they fit in and what you'd use them for, because I think that kind of gets lost. Like, what the heck is the difference between Microsoft Defender for Cloud and Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps? Like, all of our apps in the cloud? Like, I don't get it. And so I'll explore that a little bit more. I don't have a blog link for it yet because it's not live, but our team blog blog, itopstalk.com. If you go there and check it out in about 24 hours, you'll see
it will be up. Next up is some of the stuff around Microsoft Sentinel, again, renamed. But the big thing that I'm really focused on at the moment, and which I'm now telling a lot of my customers about, is looking at a change in some of the blades that are available. So we now have the Content Hub and repositories. So we have the ability to utilize repositories to store all of our Sentinel resources and artifacts, which is phenomenal. The Content Hub, on the other hand, I think is going to be the one that is most widely used. So for a lot of the products that are out and about, particularly when it comes to our partner products, trying to work out what it is you need to be able to monitor, what workbooks you need, what hunting queries is really, really tricky. So we've come up with the Content Hub to package up a whole lot of that stuff together to say, if you have this particular product in your environment, here is all the artifacts you need in order to keep on top of that. I think that's going to be amazing. We've got a whole range of new data connectors that are available. The additional UEBA models, so user and entity behavior analytics, so more machine learning going on in the back end. That ties into our fusion alerts as well, so trying to find new threat tactics and attack techniques that are being used out in the wild. We're encompassing those into all of our machine learning and AI attack detections. And then we've got the Azure Synapse integration now, which is really, really cool, and the automation playbook gallery. So I'm so pleased they finally brought this in. So it means that when you go into Sentinel and you're wanting to automate something, there is now a playbook template area that you can go to and say, I want to be able to send an email when I get a high alert, and there is a template available for that. I want to get IP reputation information. There is a workbook available for that. So we can get all of that straight in and deploy it straight into our environment without having to go anywhere else. I love the playbook gallery. Sentinel also has some new features around pricing. So we can now try it for free, Log Analytics and Sentinel together for 31 days with up to 10 gig of ingestion per day, which is huge. Like, that is a lot of data that we can ingest. And for anyone who has E5, the benefit that we had that was originally going to expire, I believe, in March next year, we've now turned it on and it's now permanent. So you get 100 meg of data per user per month to ingest into Sentinel at no cost. It's part of your E5 subscription, which is fantastic.
It's really cool. It sounds like a lot of those announcements are sort of lowering the barrier to adoption. And that's a term that we use quite commonly, which basically means when you're faced with a new product and you're trying to wrap your head around how it works, it's not normally the how it works stuff that's hardest. It's the what should we configure in it and how do we do that configuration? And I think a lot of, like you said, the automation playbooks gallery kind of really helps with that. And I also love the fact that we're adding in these user and entity behavior analytics models and new machine learning algorithms, because when I talk to people about security, especially the Microsoft security products that are in our cloud, I'm like, you are getting our entire Microsoft security team. This is not you having to go in and figure out what's risky and what's not, and then what should happen. There is a whole bunch of really smart people talking to other really smart people outside of Microsoft, and then the power of machine learning and AI, constantly looking at signals and analyzing and keeping up to date with the latest threats. So all of that is what you're getting for the price that you're paying for the security products. And I don't think people kind of appreciate that when they just think of it as being just another piece of software.
Another tool, and that's the thing. So the fact that we are constantly updating our machine learning and AI that goes behind the scenes for a lot of these security products is what gives it its value, because it means that those latest threats that are coming out and about, we see them, we add them in. So even when it comes to like your analytic rules inside Sentinel, the new analytic rules that just get added in automatically into the template gallery for you to use for any of the new Strontium attacks and things like that that come out, you may not even be aware of, but Microsoft is.
Excellent.
Okay, so next up we have Microsoft Defender for Business. So this one is really, really cool. So this is for those small to medium-sized businesses who cannot devote money or large amounts of money to their security, but they still need security. So Microsoft Defender for Business gives them the ability to have that enterprise-grade endpoint security, but at a cost that is more bearable for them, rather than having to buy this massive behemoth system that they probably cannot look after and control. So it is you can buy it as a standalone solution, but it can also be bundled up as part of your Microsoft 365 Business Premium subscription as well.
Yeah, and I might talk to you about maybe doing a summary post on this, because I think there was a little bit of confusion around this announcement about what was included and what wasn't included in this Microsoft Defender for Business. I think I saw one question about whether or not Windows Server was supported with Microsoft Defender for Business. And I took a little bit of digging to turn around and find the answer to that one. I think I put a tweet out that basically turned around and said that I think it works out that Microsoft Defender for Business includes Microsoft Defender for Endpoints, and that is supported on Windows Server, I think was the long-winded answer.
Yeah, so it's a weird one of digging into. And I mean, I think there's even some licensing restrictions around like the number of servers, I'm pretty sure, but I haven't dug too deeply into like what is encompassed as part of this. The big one for me, though, is when they announced this was something like Defender for Endpoint or the big Microsoft 365 entire like E5 security suite, like that is a lot of work to work out exactly what you need to turn on and configure and tune for a very small business or a medium business. Like if you are under 300 employees, chances are you don't have 2 or 3 people to devote to purely security. It's just not going to happen. Yes. So having something like this that is a cut down version that is much easier to configure, much easier to manage, I think it's kind of bridging that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I will hit you up about that post, but remember, this is only in public preview later this month. So sometimes it just takes a minute for the documentation and the marketing and all the bits to come through and update to help educate people on what's in and what's out and how it all functions. But yeah, we might put our heads together and get something on itopstalk.com as well, Jess.
That would be really cool.
Awesome.
Azure AD, identity protection. I love identity protection. I'm actually going to be talking about identity protection literally after this in another session. So there have been a couple of things that have come out as part of identity protection, and identity protection hasn't gotten a lot of love recently. So it's really nice to see it getting some new things in there. So token theft detection. We finally get token theft detection as one of the detections that we can see inside of our identity protection, and those unfamiliar sign-in properties for session cookies. Now, the big one for me in here is the new functionality. So one-click enablement for that risk data extensibility, so that's being able to view information about what's going on with the risks and the users in your environment. So it's this beautiful piece of information to be able to turn that on. But the built-in workbook is where things get really cool, to be able to drill down and actually look at all of the detections that have happened in your environment and be able to look at what kind of remediations are available for those detections. So that, I think, is a really cool new piece of functionality that has come out as part of the identity protection stack.
And again, I really think that the systems and the software, because of the intelligence we're building into them, is making it easier for IT pros to do the job and achieve the end result without them having to figure out what they need to be monitoring and what the remediation steps should be. Like, we just want our environment secure, and we want to be able to go home at the end of the day, and not be working 24/7 and not worry that something's going to slip through because we didn't configure an alert or whatever.
And that's exactly it. It's trying to removing that barrier. It's trying to make it easier for security administrators and operations administrators to look after these systems without having to worry about spending hours and days tuning them to be exactly what they needed to be. We're doing that in the back end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, the last one I have is conditional access. Yay! I love conditional access.
Me too.
So now we have this new granular policy targeting that's become available to be able to filter for specific applications and devices. And this is something that I've had a number of my customers ask me about. So being able to filter down to a specific application for a conditional access policy. And the fact that we now have these beautiful dashboards that show us what's going on with our conditional access, to be able to say where it has succeeded, where it has failed, which particular conditional access policies are providing providing the most level of protection. And then our templates. So very similar to what we were saying around those automation pieces inside Sentinel, having conditional access policy templates. So a business can come in and say, well, these are the kind of things that we want to have conditional access on. How do I build that from scratch? They don't have to worry about that. We've got a lot of those standard ones now as a template available for you. And then, of course, we've got conditional access for workload identities, and that's going to be going into preview later this month. So rather than those, what we consider to be your interactive sign-ins, these are the ones that are used behind the scenes. So used by your infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and even software as a service to be able to get into your environment and authenticate. We're going to be monitoring and specifically having conditional access policies for those identities, which I think is really cool. And then continuous access evaluation is probably one of the other cool ones that I really, really like. So the idea of continuous access evaluation is rather than you've assessed as being your conditional access policies you are now allowed in, it will continuously assess your sign-in access method, and if it is deemed that you are no longer allowed to have access, it will prevent you from having access and block it. So things like your password being reset, your tokens being revoked, your account being terminated, those kind of things will actually stop your access dead in the water rather than waiting for your session to time out, which I think is fantastic.
A continuous access evaluation is one of the coolest things, and there's kind of a little behind the scenes piece of trivia that it actually required a bunch of work, because the way that token expiry is done and token refreshes. So your token is like literally like going into the nightclub and getting your wristband to say you're allowed in, right? The how long that wristband is valid for is part of a whole bunch of open standards that a whole bunch of different systems that conform to these identity standards use. So it wasn't just a case of Microsoft deciding that this was a cool thing to do and turning on this feature. We had to work with the open standards boards to get the standard changed and to get that enhanced so that we could do this. And I think my favorite kind of scenario about that is if I logged onto my computer and I'm in one of my systems and I close the lid and I walk down to the local coffee shop and then I go and jump on their public Wi-Fi, should I still be allowed access into the system because I've authenticated, right? And so there's the ability to continually evaluate whether someone's allowed access to the system is really cool. And if you haven't done anything with conditional access or you're not sure what it is really is about putting steps in place to go, we want to analyze the conditions surrounding your sign-in attempt, whether it's the user that's signing in, where they're signing in from, what device they're using, where they are, what location they're in. So we want to take that big data map of all of the things that make up this particular sign-in attempt, and then we may decide to either block that sign-in attempt if we think it's too risky, or we might prompt you for multi-factor authentication, for example. Impossible travel rules are kind of wrapped up in CA, and I kind of love those. It's like Sonia can't log in from Brisbane, Australia, and then 2 hours later log in from Brazil, because it's impossible to travel from Australia to Brazil in 2 hours. Trust me, I've tried it. Takes a lot longer than that. And so that kind of impossible travel kind of also falls into there as well with the kind of stuff that we can do with identity. So again, super cool to see.
The only thing that frustrates me, and it is probably the bane of my existence when it comes to that, because MCAS is also, Defender for Cloud Apps, is also very noisy in regards to that particular thing. So the impossible travel, VPNs. Oh, the bane of my existence. So VPNs will trigger impossible travel all the time, because people are going to be connecting to a VPN to do something completely legitimate, not like they're trying to access Netflix somewhere else. But yes, they'll be accessing a VPN from somewhere else in the world, and it will trigger that impossible travel. So it's a really tricky one. I totally understand needing it, but at the same time trying to get that alert level down so we're not getting all of that noise. I find it so frustrating.
Keeps us employed.
It does. That's true. That's true.
Excellent. Look, we are hitting the top of the hour for time. Do you have any questions? You want to jump on the chat and ask? Is there anything that we missed? Did you want clarification on something else? While we keep an eye on the chat, we're taking a break for December because it's been a long year. And I'm sure you don't want to log in on the last Thursday of December when you're hopefully taking a break. If you are working over that period, please be safe, look after yourself. We understand that a lot of our IT pros do work over that that holiday season, because businesses still operate, especially if you're in retail or medical or financial services, right? Those kind of industries don't take a break and they need somebody to be on call. So if you are on call over the holiday season or you're working through, some of the best days that I ever had were those days working between Christmas and New Year, because it was really quiet and you got to catch up on a lot of stuff. But please make sure that you are taking a break some other time, maybe in the new year, maybe before Christmas, but look after yourselves. We will be looking after ourselves because we won't be broadcasting in December. So you can tune in to see us next time on Thursday, the 27th of January, 2022, again that year, which seems like a long way away, but it'll be here before we know it, trust me. We haven't got a schedule yet for next year in terms of topics. I was actually wondering, Jess, how you'd feel about maybe doing a sesh in Alt VR, like Kathy and our US-based IT colleagues do. Have you played with Alt Space VR before?
I have not.
Yeah. So I'm going to put that out there. We won't lock it in stone for January, but Alt Space VR is a cool little thing. You don't need a VR headset, although I do have one, so I may use it depending, but you can get into Alt Space VR without needing any other special equipment, because it'll just run on your computer. I'm going to drop in a link in the chat to altvr.com, where is the website where you can sign up and have a bit of a nosy. But it's kind of speaking to it's kind of the start of this metaverse concept that you might have heard some of the tech companies talking about, where you can go and interact with other people, where you have an avatar that is responding to, you know, the keystrokes that you're making and the movements that you're doing. It's just kind of a more interactive way of chatting with each other, and it's been used quite successfully. I know that Kathy uses it a ton with the US-based Women IT Pros group, and also help organise some sessions around Microsoft Ignite, where people are getting together for watch parties or to debrief after a session, for example, in Alt Space VR things. On the fun side, Kathy's shown us through some pretty amazing worlds that exist in Alt Space VR just for general public consumption, including a Harry Potter themed space where you can walk through the castle and you can see all of the portraits on the wall and the moving staircases and all of that kind of stuff, and the Great Hall, and also what was the other one we did? A drag racing one, where you get in and all of your little avatars are sitting in two different drag racing cars, and it's really, really noisy, and then they hit the button and you literally race down the road.
That is very cool.
In your drag racing car. So it's really interesting to see kind of what people are doing in that space. If you've got some time and you feel like having a nosy over the holiday period and into January, go and have a look, and we might have a play with it in January. No promises, but
that sounds really cool. I'd be up for that, I reckon.
Excellent. And on that note, well, we're going to say goodbye. Jess and I are probably going to eat and rush off to our next events. I hope you've enjoyed this and you've managed to grab some lunch yourself between whatever else you've got going on in your day. Have a great holiday period, whatever you're doing, hopefully with the people you love. I know that we still have a significant amount of travel restrictions, especially around APAC at the moment. So yeah, stay safe, take a break. Thank you for all your support this year, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you all very much. It's been fantastic this year, and I'm really looking forward to see what we can do next year.
Sounds great. Bye, everybody.
The entire community, a huge thank you to Sonia and Jess for running these for us every month as well. It's something that I try and get to as often as I can, and I just wanted to publicly say thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
My pleasure.